Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. I'm Rebecca Balan, and this is the episode where we bring on industry experts to help us explore a trend in the tech world and dive deep. Today, we're bringing you a live interview from TechCrunch Disrupt 2025, where AI editor Russell Brandom sat down with OpenAI's head of startups, Marc Manara. The pair took a closer look at how AI-native companies are evolving beyond the GPT wrapper label, and how product development cycles are shrinking from weeks to days.
I'm Russell Brandom, the AI editor at TechCrunch, and I have with me Marc Manara, head of startups at OpenAI. Those of you may be hearing this in your podcast feed, in which case, no, the weird acoustics are because we're recording live at TechCrunch Disrupt. We can feel the magic in the air, I think it's fair to say.
Yep.
So, I'm super thrilled to be talking with you. Obviously, OpenAI is just an unbelievably exciting company right now, and I think, what's coming out of OpenAI has huge implications for so many startups in so many different ways. So I want to start with a bit of a sort of challenge for you. I think there's this idea that I hear a lot in talking to folks in the industry that OpenAI is sort of focused on consumer AI. It's the ChatGPT company, and enterprise AI and B2B is more, your Anthropic, your Cohere, everyone else. Do you agree with that? Is that sort of looking at it the wrong way? What's your take on that?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, we do have a big consumer business, a successful consumer product, and that is core to OpenAI. But we've invested heavily on the B2B side of the business, in particular with enterprises and startups. And so my focus is working with startups so that day to day we're trying to support the companies building on top of our platform, some of the most innovative startups in AI, Cursor and Perplexity and Abridge and Harvey and all these category-defining companies. The investments are massive, and I think we increasingly are trying to work backward from what these startups actually need and build specifically for them, make our models better at how they perform in product for these companies, build our API and platform around the needs that they have, and we've invested in building out a pretty significant team behind that as well. So we are a global team focused on startups. We're now in Europe and Asia, obviously here in San Francisco, New York, and we built the team really with startups in mind. So it's a lot of former founders, a lot of former operators of startups, folks who've invested in startups. Somebody just joined the team last week who's a former VC. We really want to prioritize what startups are asking us for, which is essentially make your models better, improve the product, help us increasingly figure out go-to-market, and really invest from the all of OpenAI in it. So everyone from execs to product to research to sales, our solutions team, which is heavily invested, is really laser focused on that mission.
Yeah. Well, so I want to unpack that. I mean, obviously, more powerful models is great. It's tricky because it's sort of the product that does everything. It's hard to tell which part are you focused on. But I guess, what are you hearing from startups in terms of what they want from, a GPT-5, GPT-6, and so on?
So it's interesting. So there's a parallel with programming languages that I think about a lot, which is there's two kinds of programming languages. There's ones that everyone complains about, and then there's ones that nobody uses, right? And I think that there's a very similar analogy to how you think about models, which, we have lots of scaled usage of our models in all kinds of startup products, but startups are really vocal about telling us, hey, it's not good enough in these ways, or in this situation, this kind of task, we want to see different behavior, we want something more steerable. So I think right now the things that are top of mind are, it's always cost to latency, can we bring those down? That's sort of a forever. But in particular, I think it's for people building agents, these models need to call tools. They call functions, they call external tools that either the developer defines or they can use third-party tools. That tool calling that an agent needs to do is really what drives the performance of the agent. Is it making successful tool calls? Is it calling the right tools at the right time? Is it making mistakes along the way or not. So that's an area of a pretty intense focus right now. The other is coding. Our models are used heavily in coding applications, and I think there's many parts to what makes a great coding model. There's the actual code generation. There's the tool calling, which is part of how Cursor and Windsurf and Cognition and these other companies build on top of the models. Then there's actually like the personality and the behavior of the model. So is the model telling you what it does before it goes and calls a tool or takes some action? That actually matters a lot if you're a user of Cursor and you're sitting in front of the screen and the model is making 20 tool calls in a row. That actually is not the best user experience if it's not giving you some context of what it's doing so you can kind of monitor and redirect or follow along. Similarly, there's code quality. So writing functional code is one thing, and the models are very good at that, but is it creating stylistic imperfections that somebody who's an expert engineer who's been doing this for 20 years doesn't like to see in their code? That's a problem. So these are like little things, but they add up to a really significant set of improvements we're trying to make to the models right now.
Yeah. One of the odd things, you were going through sort of all the different products that coding products specifically that have OpenAI built in. We're in this odd moment where there's still the sort of drop-down menu. Every time someone launches their Cursor, they're thinking, okay, do I want GPT-5? Do I want Gemini? Do I want Claude? Whereas, I guess I think of it for more mature technologies. I'm not asking, Dropbox which sort of hosting provider they want to use. It's sort of, you would expect at a certain point people say, well, okay, I want the product to work a certain way, and I'm going to just hard code in the model that works best for that. But it feels like we're not quite at that point yet in terms of what users want.
I think that's right. I think developers can be very opinionated in terms of what product they, yeah. This may shock you. But I think part of it is allowing the developer a degree of control in the product to say, no, I have an opinion, or what I'm trying to do, I think I have an opinion on which model is best, and I'm going to consciously choose that. In many other products outside of coding, startups are not giving that choice, and they're already saying, no, we've done the evals, we've run the tests, we have a sense of how to prompt this model most effectively and which one is the best across these tasks. And sometimes there might be multiple models powering the product, and they've made choices of which task. That, I think, is very common outside of coding. With coding, I think there seems to be a deference to the developer to give them the choice and have control. Even if there might be a default or a suggestion, or some of these companies have an automatic option where they are deciding under the hood and trying to use intelligent routing to say, okay, for this kind of task, we're going to use GPT-5. For this other task, we think 4.1 is better. There's, I think, an evolution still happening there, but I think the origins of it is developer control.
Yeah. So maybe that's specific to coding, that like developers are fussy and want to be able to sort of tweak around the edges.
Or power users. I think that is part of it as well.
Nice
to spin it a little bit more nicely, yeah.
So you mentioned multiple models. A thing that I hear a lot, particularly in these sort of multi-step workflows where, okay, we've got one system where we say, what kind of user is this? We've got one model just doing that. If we find out it's this kind of user, then what they want is fairly simple, so maybe we don't need a huge model. Often I hear sort of founders talk about, well, we always want to keep costs down, and we want specifically, we don't want to be bringing more intelligence to this particular task than we need. So there are a bunch of open source models, some of which made by OpenAI itself, that if you need something a little more contained, the result is the flagship models like GPT-5 are often sort of working in the context of a lot of other smaller models. Does that change how you think about what you need to do for GPT-5 for that to shine, in that context?
Yes, I think the reason we ship multiple sizes and versions of models, so we have a GPT-5 Nano, Mini, and the full GPT-5 is exactly for this reason. And we see startups try to bring the right tool for the right job inside of their product and save cost, bring the latency down. But some of these complex workflows have all of those models happening simultaneously, and sometimes, many times in succession. So you think of a company like Decagon or Sierra that's taking in customer support inquiries. They will have a bunch of orchestration of different models happening in succession, a bunch of classification, what type of intent is this user, and maybe quick analysis that's happening really fast in small models. But the end reasoning step that actually produces the output to the user might have to reason over a lot of context, and so they might use a slightly bigger model for that. And in some cases, they have fine tunes that are running to say, okay, I'm fine tuning for a very specific purpose on tone or like even function calling or classification, where you can see improvements in those techniques with fine tuning. All that can be happening in one step to the user, so you don't perceive that it's happening, but it's there. And I think that's just like developers and founders and engineering teams being really smart about how to bring the right tool to do those different jobs. So that is always a focus for us, is to have kind of each of the tools that you might need to use in the product available to you from OpenAI, small, medium, and large. And I think that will be true into the future as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned fine tuning, because that reminds me of something. I heard that a sort of under discussed strength of OpenAI specifically was the fine tuning, that because of the infrastructure advantage, it was much easier to try 30 different variations of fine tuning on a specific task and say, okay, which flavor works best here? Is that something you've sort of focused on? Is that because you've heard a lot of feedback from startups saying, we really care about getting the best possible fine tuning?
Yeah, so we've had a fine tuning API for a few years now. We see it as a tool in the tool set. So we generally, for working with a startup and we're advising them technically, we don't recommend starting with fine tuning. We say, these models are very steerable, especially GPT-5 and some of the more recent models, where you can prompt to get a lot of the behaviors you want. You can put few shot examples in the prompt, you can have really complex long instructions, et cetera. And that often is enough to get the performance that a company's looking for. But there are cases where fine-tuning is an advantage, and there's now multiple kinds of fine-tuning that you can do on the OpenAI platform. Supervised fine-tuning is the one we've had the longest. That is, bring tens of thousands of examples, steer the tone, the output format, some of the structure, and there's lots of reasons you might do that. You can also fine-tune to make your function calling more accurate in certain cases. More recently, we've released reinforcement fine-tuning, which, think of it as using RL to fine-tune our reasoning models. So the advantage of that is if you have a hard reasoning use case where it's maybe a domain-specific reasoning, like Ambience Healthcare was a company that used this technique to try to improve the selection of insurance codes for healthcare billing. And so it's actually a very complicated problem. The models are like okay out of the box, but it turns out reinforcement fine-tuning, bringing a number of examples and trying to improve the reasoning over this task has a dramatic impact on the accuracy. So that's an example where it's a very, very powerful technique for that specific use case. But again, we don't start there. We start with let's try all the lower hanging fruit that doesn't cost money to go run a training job, doesn't cost a lot of engineering and research time to go build these data sets. If you can get impact that way, that's your best bet. If you can't, and you have one of these more challenging domain-specific reasoning use cases, it might be a good fit for our reinforcement fine-tuning. And a lot of what the work that our team does is helping companies navigate that decision-making, and then if they're ready to actually go fine-tune, just go do that. And you can do it really fast, and really quickly, and effectively on the platform, which is great. With a little bit of help from us, we can help you kind of optimize.
Awesome. Cool. So, we're talking now, you've just gotten off stage from this panel about specifically using AI in the marketing function for a startup. Great panel. Everyone go live stream it or go look at the video. Are there other, we've been talking about examples like Cursor and Lovable where the model is really performing the core product function. There wouldn't be a Cursor without AI models. But there are also these situations where maybe AI isn't your core product, but you're a lean startup, you're growing, you're thinking, okay, can we maybe stretch the marketing dollar a bit further? Can we have, one person in this department instead of 3? Is that part of what you look at with startups? I guess what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, our work day to day is primarily working with companies where AI is the core of their business. So we like to say very similarly, if you took the LLM out of the product, the product might not work. That's the type of company where we can generally be most useful to them because they're operating at the bleeding edge of this technology. Every new model we release, every new API feature may have an impact on their product market fit and the product metrics. Hopefully we're helping them improve how they're growing their company. And so that's a lot of our day-to-day. But we do see how these companies use AI inside the business. And that's been a really interesting lens. I think engineering is definitely one of the areas where this is most prolific. So companies using Cursor or Windsurf or other coding tools that have intelligence built in, Codex from OpenAI. And what's interesting is it does change the product development lifecycle quite a bit. We used to think in the old days of a 2-week sprint as like the norm, and that became very common among startups. I'm a former founder, by the way. We ran these 2-week sprints for a long time. Now we're seeing companies can ship so much in that time frame that 2 weeks is just way too long, and most have shifted to a week, or even I met one company that's moving to just 3 days. I think Cursor famously has like a 1-day sprint, and it's a dramatic change, and it means that you are no longer blocked by what you can build. I remember being a founder, just how long it took us to stand up our mobile app. We had launched with web first, and we're building out the first mobile app, and it was like a slog to go build that thing. Today we could do it in a week and have something like production ready and live, and it just changes the way you design the org, how fast you can build, small teams accomplishing a ton more. Outside of coding, we are seeing a lot of use cases in go-to-market. So think sales teams, marketing teams. Where I've seen the most advantage has been, I think, on the research side. So, we were talking in the previous session that an SDR's job 5 or 6 years ago, a sales development rep's job, involved a lot of research to go find, okay, what are the companies that matter? Can I find the contact information for the right ones? Can I find events and signals that I can draft off of to figure out, the right time to email someone who might be a prospect? Now you can effectively automate most of that grunt work. And the SDR's job changes where you're managing a set of tools that are helping you be 10 times or more productive, and then still having human in the loop to actually have the conversation with the customer, do the consultative work to maybe get to a sale. But it means that a small team can do a lot more even in the go-to-market side of the business as well. So those are a couple examples. We obviously see a lot of customer support automation, and companies like Decagon, Sierra, Maven AGI supplying the technology that other startups are using to build on top of. Parloa is another one. So that is an area where the tooling has gotten really, really good and can give a lot of leverage to the organization as well.
Cool. So to zoom out a little bit, I think one of the really interesting shifts to see in the startup landscape is, I think, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was this, the term GPT wrapper, right? A lot of startups got tagged as, oh, that's just a GPT wrapper. Maybe you can make a good product, but you're going to get outcompeted by the models. It feels like we don't hear that anymore. Like now people are taking those companies a lot more seriously. There's a sense that that's a much more defensible way to build a startup and launch a product. I guess, do you have a theory about what changed or sort of why that is?
I think these companies have just been very successful at growing, and so
can't argue with that.
It's you look at companies like Lovable that hadn't launched a year ago or a little over a year ago, and they're doing almost 200 million in ARR right now. It's like, yes, they use models in the product, but it's hard to argue with that growth and some of the numbers that they're putting out. They're just one example, obviously, but across all different verticals, we're B2B verticals, so legal tech, there's some very scaled users like Harvey and Legora and Spellbook, and even up, if you look at healthcare, it's Ambience and Abridge are leading the pack. You can go to many of these verticals and see actually these businesses are getting a ton of traction and they're building really successfully. So I think that, just like that alone, has been differentiating. What I see working with these companies is that the ones that have been most successful tend to be very sophisticated about how the models work, actually. And you see a lot of founding teams that have really heavy math backgrounds, research backgrounds, not just pure engineering, but actually have a little bit of an edge because they understand what is a transformer, how does it actually work, how might you design data sets if you're fine tuning, how might you bring the right context into the model when you're using it, and kind of work at that bleeding edge, and that does give an advantage, even though you might be building on top of somebody else's models like OpenAI's or our peers. Like that knowledge allows you to move faster and build a better product that has stronger performance on the core product metrics that you might be measuring down the road. So there is a theme there that I have seen across some of the most successful companies built on our technology.
So the differentiating factor then, it isn't just, oh, okay, it's the interface layer you got there, or you have an understanding of the market. It really is, you're behind the wheel of the car, now you have to drive it. And sort of understanding the model and how you're going to get the most out of it really is a huge advantage. If, why is Harvey why did Harvey succeed and get to that ARR when, certainly there's lots of other legal yes. AI startups that were going for it. A big factor, in your opinion, is the understanding of the core AI technology.
Definitely. I'll give you another example. I was chatting with the founder of Fixer, which is an AI for email startup, just last week, and they're a heavy fine-tuning user. And you ask why, and it's like, well, actually, when you're bringing AI to this specific problem of triaging email, doing calendaring, and like all the things that you might do with your email inbox, there's all different kinds of kind of patterns across email. Actually, like the base model is pretty good, but you can get even more performance out of it through fine-tuning for different use cases. So an example is, you're going back and forth to schedule some meeting. Like when you say Friday, were you talking about last Friday, or like next Friday, or 2 weeks from now Friday? It's like, well, actually, the models are like sometimes get that wrong. And so fine-tuning, they found for all these different sort of subtasks in their product gave them much better performance, and it means that that is an edge that they now have because they've developed this skill of how to use the models really effectively. So the product gets better because of that sophistication and how they use it.
Yeah, it's funny you should bring them up. Actually, I talked with the founder, Richard Hollingsworth, who's great, and one thing he said that I really remember, he said, they're trying to make the perfect email assistant. He said, the perfect email assistant, I don't necessarily want the smartest person in the world. I want someone who knows me really well. That's and right. My sort of needs and how I use email. And that kind of translates to, okay, maybe we use the base model. We don't need, the absolute bleeding edge, but we need to fine tune it so that it really understands the quirks of how all of, the different ins and outs of the specific task. Cool. So otherwise, you were talking about go-to-market sales as sort of core functions. Are there places or sort of corners of companies where you see maybe opportunities yet to be had where AI hasn't really had that impact yet? You're saying, this is maybe undiscovered country for folks out here who are thinking of where they could make an impact.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of activity across all different parts of the B2B landscape and different verticals. Maybe there's one thing that I think we're still working on as an industry right now is longer and longer horizon agent tasks, where we talked a bit on the previous panel about the fact that there's still a human in the loop in most use cases around AI, and I think that's a good thing right now. It's like some end-to-end tasks. Either the models still need to improve for that to be more and more reliable, or the user has to be able to guide the model in very specific ways. And I think that's an area where as the models improve, ours and others, that is going to be more and more the reality that we'll be able to do, is to hand off a more ambiguous task similar to how you'd work with a coworker and allow them to go run with it for longer. We're seeing that start to happen more in coding as the first case that's probably the farthest along, but there's probably that applied across 25 different areas that I think there's still some white space to be had.
Yeah. It is interesting. I think a lot about the difference between a person overseeing maybe 2 AI models when they're coding of, okay, this one can go, versus a person overseeing 200, which is maybe more the sort of marketing sales version where, okay, we need I need a lot of eyes looking for leads, and then when you come back to me, I can sort of oversee what's happening. But it does feel like that friction is kind of greater in different parts of the company a lot of the time. Are there particular, I don't know, I mean, I'm just sort of circling on the same question, but are there particular corners of it that you see as not really fully automated yet?
I mean, most areas are probably not fully automated yet. I think like, where we've seen the most activity, I would say, is coding, customer support, inside of a company, coding, customer support, go-to-market and sales. Increasingly, we're seeing some activity in accounting and finance, so using AI to handle more analysis and planning steps internally at different parts of the org. Some of that's tax-related, some of it's forecasting, targets. I think there's probably still more fruit to be born there, but that might be an area where we've focused a bit more on like, okay, how do you make the models really good at data analysis, as an example? I think there's a lot of juice to still squeeze there from model performance, and that touches on some of maybe the finance areas and core data analysis, where the models are good at generating SQL queries, but reasoning over data, over tabular data, I think it's an area where we're still trying to make the models better and improve. There might be then opening even more doors to what you can build on top of that.
Yeah. Okay. I want to zoom back. This is zooming way back now, but you mentioned one of the things that you're sort of a battle you're constantly fighting. You said cost and latency. Everyone wants to be cheaper. Everyone wants it to be faster. It can never be fast or cheap enough, really. But there's this interesting phenomenon. The latency needs of different use cases are very different, and in particular for real-time use cases, say live captioning of video streams, where it really needs to be running as fast as the data is coming in, and so latency becomes this incredible race of either it can go fast enough to keep up, or we can't really do this. When you're faced with that kind of problem, how much wiggle room is there in sort of modern inference architecture? How much can you say, all right, maybe we need to, scale down the model we're using a little bit, but we can get it as fast as you need it to be?
Yeah, I mean, this is ongoing efforts in research and engineering to make the intelligence that we can offer available more cheaply and faster. That's like full stop. Major focus all the time, and we've made a lot of we had a lot of big wins on that over the last couple of years, but it will perpetually be the thing that we need to do. I think we've been, I guess, in some ways surprised by people's patience to wait for some of these models to produce their outputs, but in almost every case in the history of technology, if you make something faster, usage improves, product metrics improve. So we know that has to happen. I think there's a couple levers to play with. One is the model itself, and so one of the areas where the Codex model, GPT-5 Codex, actually was showing strengths was actually having variable processing time. So a simpler task that you send to this model would have a result more quickly, and a more complicated task that you and I would have to reason over longer, the model would also reason over longer. And so we trained it in a way where it was trying to bring down the latency overall by bring it down to places where the least intelligence was or the least chains of thought tokens were required. So that's like one example of how the model plays a role. But then there's inference architecture as well, and how we actually serve up these models. And we made a lot of improvements on things like caching, which is low-level infra stuff that you probably don't think about every day, but it matters a ton to our startup customers, where if they can get caching percentage higher, it means, number one, the tokens are cheaper because we charge less, and then two, things move much faster, and the response to your user gets faster. So those are like two of the main drivers, and then shipping smaller models that have the same level of intelligence. Like those are the levers that we're constantly trying to pull, because every startup wants it faster, and we want it faster. So we'll keep chipping away.
Yeah, awesome. Well, on that note, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for agreeing to do these back to back. I know not always easy, but this was an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.